father had never smoked a day in his life and still ended up with cancer. I considered other factors, even besides genetics, could be at play, but that's a future conversation for a future episode. As I said, the scale is not my obsession now when it comes to health, and we will definitely talk about that in future episodes. But it is going for 7:30 now, and we're about to dive into another little segment, so I am going to take a really quick break to get through these important messages. It's the last break of our show, so we just got an hour pushing right on through after this, so don't go anywhere because Annii Gets Healthy will return right after this. Alright, welcome back to Annii Gets Healthy. If you're just tuning in, this is the show where I talk about lifestyle, all these aspects of health and wellness, how I've experienced them, and how my own lifestyle changes opened my eyes to various things. In this episode, titled My Weight, A Deeply Personal Tale, I talk about just that, my weight, and my relationship with it over the course of my life, giving myself a proper introduction before I go on and talk about a myriad of things on this show. Once again, I feel like being vulnerable is just fair to you guys. If anybody wants to hear what I do, and at some point, if I get more credentials, take advice from me, I think the least I can do is let you know who I am and where I've come from. So, I was just talking about my father having his lung cancer come about the Christmas before my last semester of college. So, expectedly, during the semester, my mental health was very roller coaster-esque. But despite it all, I actually graduated with the highest marks of my college career, which was, trust me, it was a lot higher than what I had in those fun semesters. So, in regards to my dad's cancer, he had a partial lobectomy, but his cancer returned soon after in his liver. He began chemo, and I became depressed in my newfound boredom of educated unemployment. So I had a lot of time to sit around and think and worry. But luckily, my unemployment was brief as I lucked into a job contract the next month. I gained a lot of experience and confidence in what I was doing. I enjoyed my highway commute every morning and longed for my arrival home at the end of the day. A routine set in pretty quickly, each day sipping my sweetened tea on the way to work and throughout the morning, a soda at lunch, another one of those boxes of healthy foods. And you know what, I had a boss at the time, God love him, who would say, those things are full of sodium. And I actually took his advice, and I started, even though I was still having, boxed processed foods, I wasn't getting the, TV dinners, because they really are full of salt. But anyways, while I was at this job, a lot of really good things happened for me. I was taking more accountability and more responsibility in my life, and I was just being a responsible person, and I felt good about going to work every day, and I was genuinely enjoying the work I was doing. I was seeing the positive effects that it was having on the community and people in this province. So I did feel good about that. What I did notice slowly happening, though, was I've always been an anxious person, but I'd never really paid too much attention to my own anxiety because I've always just been more of a depressed person, and that's always won out. However, when I was at this job, a few things happened. I'd really cleaned my act up, and so at this point, I'm not even desiring to do any of these things that I used to consider fun. I'm just kind of wanting to just be normal, and that was becoming increasingly easier. But with my constant clarity and also being enclosed when you're working a 9-to-5 cubicle job, it's easy to get anxious, it's easy to get fidgety, and it's easy to overthink all sorts of little nitpicky things throughout the day. I was tapping all day, and I was just feeling really antsy and just high energy, and I was usually a very lethargic person. So I knew something was up, and so I don't know, I didn't know what to do. I was okay, I've been on meds all my life, and so I had a doctor who had me on a new prescription. I was yeah, I'll just take a tiny bit of this. It feels weird, driving, whatever, so I'll take it when I get to work, and then early enough so that I won't have to worry about, being weird driving home. And it was all this, really careful calculation of, okay, how can I, get through the workday, but also, drive? you know, it's really kind of mind-blowing that this is where I was at, that I was that desperate, that I was willing to, you know, once again, there's a lot of anxiety drugs that I could have taken that probably wouldn't have been so hard on my head. But, no, this one absolutely was. And I kind of got to a point where I was like, I need to do something else. Something is wrong. Not just something is wrong, I knew that for a lot of years, but I must be able to do something different to fix this. And believe it or not, it is at this point in my life, and I'm going to pause here, it is at this point in my life that everything changed. Like, this is the end of, like, you know, me being someone who just had nothing to do at the end of the day but, you know, hang out, drive around, play a few video games. That was my idea of leisure, but, like, this really was the new chapter of me. So, the time in my own timeline anyway, is November of 2016. At this point in my life, I weighed 267 pounds. So that's a little bit, you know, that's not my highest weight. As you know, back in 2014, I weighed 286. After getting the alarming news that I had the high cholesterol, I lost the weight. But, like, even though the weight remained off, I didn't continue to lose because I was eating the same crappy fast food and washing it all down with the same sugary and acidic sodas. Nothing changed. It was like I cut back for a while, and, like, caloric reduction itself just doesn't work. And once again, we'll talk about this in future episodes, but, like, you'll lose weight for so long, and then, you know, you can keep your diet relatively similar, just eating less, but, you know, your metabolism doesn't care, your set point doesn't care, you're just going to want to put that weight back on because your body feels like something is wrong. You know, that's not a fault to you, or you can just quit the diet and then it'll all come on and more. So, I mean, losing 20 pounds and actually keeping it off, I don't even know how that happened with what I was doing, because I'm sure I tried. I remember I was doing those, like, you know, Weight Watchers powders, you know, that you use to make protein drinks and everything, which, you know, I doubt anybody at the gym is using those. Once again, like, if Weight Watchers works for you, that's really great, but it never worked for me. I was never a Weight Watchers girl. And every time that I tried it, it was like I would lose weight and then I would put it all back on and more, because that's just how diets worked for me. I couldn't do anything temporary. The difference in my life now is that, like, you know, I have a little bit of fun with eating some sweet stuff here and there, but, like, my diet is relatively consistent. It's not something that has a whole lot of fluctuation throughout the week. Depending on my activity level, I might eat a few more carbs here and there, but once again, I really am rambling now that I'm talking about all these little itsy-bitsy things. So, what changed when we fast forward back to where we were talking before? We're talking about 2014, let's go back to November of 2016. So, graduated college, working. I had, up to that point, been a relatively sedentary person. So, I kind of was starting to attribute my worsening anxiety to the fact that I was in that cubicle all day long. I was thinking that it was making it worse. And, you know, and to this day, believe me, I put so much faith in drug therapy for my mental health. It has been monumental for me, but I knew that, you know, I was a big soda drinker. I was, like, talk about, like, all the addictions of life, but one thing that was, like, daily and unhideable from the world, and I would never compare this with any, like, real problems that have popped up here and there in my life, but, like, soda, I was like a 2-can-a-day Coca-Cola girl, and there's nothing good about that. Like, for me, anyways. I can't even just say for me, just for anybody. That's the one thing I don't think anybody's going to debate with me. It tastes good, but, like, it's just pure sugar and bad for the teeth, and I loved it. I loved it. I drank it like crazy. And I also drank a lot of that, like, Nestea iced tea. I went nuts for that. So, yeah, like, I would bring one of, like, I would have, like, a cup of, like, hot tea that I would put in, like, a travel mug that had a bunch of sugar in it. And I would drink that in the car on the way to work. And then I would get to work and I would open up a can of iced tea and I would drink that. And then, you know, I think I would drink water in between, because I did drink a little bit of water back then, but I was big on the sweetened drinks, obviously, in addition. But then lunchtime would come and I would open up that can of Coke. You know, I was never like an alcohol drinker. That's the one thing. Like when I was like a kid, I did for sure. But like as like an adult, I never really cared much for it. So for me, at the end of like a work day, you know, like during lunch, I would have a can of Coke. When I would come home at the end of a work day and put my feet up, I lived to have a can of Coke, a can of regular Coke. I loved it. So, you know, as I was getting more antsy, I was like looking back at all the caffeine, and caffeine is what I thought was like the worst part. And I even remember saying to my boss one day, because he was like, "What's wrong with you?" Because I was like really like fidgety, and I was like, "I don't know," and he was like, "It's all the caffeine." And I was just so quick to take advice at this point. I don't know why. I guess I was just desperate, and I was like, "Huh, yeah, I need to drink less caffeine." Bear in mind, I was not even thinking about sugar at this point. That came, though, shortly after, but I was like, you know what, I'm not gonna drink any, like, you know, iced coffee kind of drink. I'm not gonna drink any iced tea. I'm not gonna drink soda, because all of those things have caffeine, and it's just gonna make me more anxious, so I don't need that. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna cut it all out. I'm gonna drink, like, nothing but water, really. I don't know, I think I was starting to look at the back of, like, juice containers, and I was noticing that, like, nutritionally there wasn't anything really incredible there. It just seemed to be a lot of sugar. And I mean your like standard grocery store, big box brand name juices. You know, your standard orange juice doesn't really like have any of the, you know, it's high sugar and there's no fiber and the stuff that you would actually get from eating a fruit. But I did kind of put myself on a very strict thing of I'm just going to drink water and see how that works. Now, bear in mind, my eating for the first like week or two of this did not change. I was still a total fast food addict. I was still, you know, eating all the sweet treats and all of that stuff and eating at night. You know, none of that really changed at first, but I did lose like a couple pounds. I don't really remember how much it was at first because, you know, like I don't even think I weighed myself until, I don't know, my memory on that first month is really vague, but I know I lost maybe like 5 or 10 pounds or something like that. It was monumental enough that I was like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this. And I kind of added another little thing to it where I was like, you know what, I'm going to stop eating out all the time because I was so big on like going through drive-thrus, and which also costs a lot of money. Like, okay, you can have like a decent job after college, but if you're spending all this money on food, like my thing at the time was saving up for a new car, and I have that new car now. It's beautiful, I love it, right? And the fact that I was able to afford it, you know, I do attribute some of that to stopping with the eating out because, like, you know, it's like quitting smoking. Like you save, it's funny because you think about how much money you save quitting smoking, but when you think about quitting fast food, like, you know, how much money can you spend a day if you eat one meal in the car every day? It adds up so much faster, unless you're like a pack a day kind of person. But like, I mean, it does add up incredibly fast. And, you know, stuff. Once again, my goal was like 1 month with no fast food. I'm going to see how that works. So that kind of brings us up to like the first couple weeks into December of 2016. And so Christmas is right around the corner. And I have a lot of family out around the Bay. And so I went out around the Bay Boxing Day that year. And I went out with really clear goals in mind. I was like, I'm not just gonna give in to this temptation, because in my mind I was seeing it as like, this food is really good for a few minutes. And then like the repercussions of that aren't good. I had been reducing the amounts of, you know, empty carbs and sugars that I had been consuming, and I definitely wanted to stay on track with that when I was around the Bay. So I had like a really strict thing for me. Once again, I was not on the soda, tea, juice, milk, any drink that wasn't water. And then I upped my game, obviously, to the no fast food. And once again, still a very picky eater, so it was still hard to get stuff in me. But I was becoming a bit more, like, knowledgeable. Not a lot, but I knew that, like, a lot of carbs is bad, and that, like, a lot of starch, you know, is bad, and that, like, just, like, even reducing that a bit could prove helpful. So, you know, come Christmas time when I was around the Bay, and I would pick up a portion of dinner, My rule was like a small amount of potato, because I was very much a meat and potatoes kind of girl. Making myself pick up at least one vegetable, usually carrot. I was too afraid to do greens at that point, which is so sad. And a decent serving of protein, usually turkey. So I would have a very